what's the most important question that you've ever been asked? Again, I said for some, it's will you marry me? That's a pretty important one. I remember asking that question to my wife, and thankfully she said yes. Um, uh, Maybe it was something like, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Maybe that was an important question that you've been asked before. I'm just so curious now how many people have ever had to do that in court. No, okay, not many. Good. I did one time when I was a kid. I actually, such a weird story, but I actually got hit by a car when I was 12. I know, it's embarrassing. I didn't look both ways like I was taught to do from the time I could walk. I was in a hurry to go play baseball, ironically. My brother and my best friend were way up ahead. They had just bought the baseball. I was behind them. For weird reasons, I let them go on ahead because I was watching a baseball game, actually. And the game got boring. It was the Cubs versus the Cardinals. Maybe we should sue the Cubs for that. Anyway, so it got boring. My dad was mowing the lawn. I said, Dad, I'm going to go ahead and join them. He goes, be careful. They're already way ahead of you. They're going to go buy a baseball so you guys can play. We couldn't find our baseball. And he goes, your little brother, and your friend are up there. Okay, I'll be back. Took off down the road, went to the first store that I thought they were going to go to, no baseball. And they weren't there. And it was a small town, about 3,000 people. So, my dad was chief of police, by the way. So they knew us. I mean, everybody's keeping an eye on us. They're like, Kevin and Kate went that way, so you want to go that way. So I go down the hill, way down the hill, and there's two stores side by side. Brookshire's and Perry's. They don't mean a thing to you, and that's fine. But anyway, I went into Perry's first because they usually had baseballs, and they had sold out. And the manager happened to see me and go, Charles. Yes. Or they called me Charles Wayne back then because that's just how they do in the South. But anyway, Charles Wayne, you looking for your brother? I said, yes. Actually, I'm looking for a baseball, but my brother will do. And he said, go over to Brookshire's because I told them they may have a baseball. See how friendly small towns are. Anyway, so I went over, saw the store manager, whose wife was one of my teachers, actually. Small town life, right? And I said, Mr. Cox, I'm looking for a baseball. He goes, we have one. And I said, great. And he said, your brother just bought it. I said, well, that's good because I hope to play baseball with them. He goes, well, they went that way, so better go catch up to them. I said, okay. Ran out of the store. There are these great brick columns in front of the store. And I ran out, and you're supposed to look left, right, and left again. Correct? Everybody know that? Please don't forget that because I'm going to tell you why it's important right now. Because I looked out and I looked left and there's nobody there. And I looked right and all I saw was the brick column. So I just assumed nobody was there. And I looked left again. But by the time I looked left again, I was way out here in the middle of the roadway, the parking area. Which is a mistake. You're supposed to stop when you look right and left. I missed that part. And by the time I looked back to the right, there was a big old car. It was a Mercury. Gigantic, probably got 4 miles to the gallon. Big old car. And it was just, the poor woman in the car was, and I'm not making fun of her because it was my fault, but she was looking at her makeup mirror. That's the last thing I remember. And she's looking, and I'm not making fun, it could have been anybody, but we didn't have cell phones, of course, back then, so it would have been me on the cell phone, maybe. But it was her looking in her makeup mirror and accelerating because she didn't see this kid just sprinting out into the road the last second when I should have been stopped. I turned, and somehow my brother sees this. They stop. They're at the top of the hill. They look back. They see me running after them. And they stop, and they turn around just in time to see this woman accelerate into me. And my brother, my little brother, goes, Charles, and like an idiot, you put your arm out like you were Superman. Yes. So I put my arm out like I'm Superman, and I'm not. And the car did not stop. until I was already spinning off the top, off of the hood of the car. And my friend, of course, said, I saw you spin off that thing like a helicopter. And he said, if I wasn't so scared for you, I would have said, that's really cool. It's like, thanks, man. So supportive. And he goes, it was really kind of cool, except it was scary. You put your hand out and it threw you up in the car and it spun you around because you finally stopped. And he said, when you hit the ground, you were still spinning. He said it was amazing. Thanks. I still got a scar. But anyway, I sort of blacked out for a second, and then I came to, miraculously, thanks be to God. Mr. Cox, who I just told you about, ran out into the street, panicking. He yelled to his employees, call 911, and I'm laying on the ground. I sit up, and honestly, my first thought is, I'm alive, that's really cool. And I sit up, and he looks at me, and I'm kind of stunned, and he's like, son, I want you to sit still. I said, no, I think I can get up. He goes, no, I'm going to want you to sit still. We've called 911. And I said, oh, no. Because guess where 911 calls in a small town when your dad's the police chief? Your dad's office. And my dad's secretary answered the 911 call. And someone described it and said, it's one of those Christian boys. And he's on the ground. And get a deputy, get somebody or one of the sergeants to come over and just get him and take him to the hospital. Okay, I'll do that. And I don't know that. So I put pressure on my hand to make myself get up because I was being stubborn and I wanted to get up. And I slipped because this arm looked like a snake. It was very broken. I mean, it's okay sort of now, but I mean, it's extremely broken. And now I'm sad because I can't play. All-star selection was that night for baseball. And guess what? I got picked. Just a little fast forward. I got picked, and they went to state, and they finished 8th in the nation in the Little League World Series. And I listened to it on the radio. Rough summer. But anyway, and this is all sermon stuff, by the way. Don't worry. It ties into what we're about to read, I promise. I'm on the ground. My dad's secretary gets the call. She hits speed dial, which was a new thing back then. Hits speed dial, and she hit the wrong speed dial. She meant to call one of my dad's sergeants to come and just get me, and then she was going to call my dad when he had a better assessment of things, since he was off that day, theoretically. And then she accidentally hit the first speed dial, which is my house. My dad, sweating, coming in from mowing the lawn on a Texas summer day, answers the phone. Hello? Oh, here's what she said. My dad told me this later. Mr. Christian, I'm sorry. I meant to call Dwight, Dwight Lively, who's his name. I meant to call Dwight. One of your sons has been hit by a car. I'll call you back. My dad said I turned 3 shades of purple and almost passed out right there. I get back on the phone. He said, I'm dialing frantically anybody I can think of. Like, what did you just say to me? By the time he got through to someone, thankfully the deputy was already, not the deputy, but the sergeant was already there, assessed me, and my dad shows up at the hospital, and he said, we're not, it has to be operated on. It's set. We're not doing it here. We're doing it at the bigger town in Nacogdoches. He goes, just get in the car. Put him in a sling. I'm putting him in the car. Of course, he's the chief, so they didn't argue. Put me in the front seat with just in pain, holding my arm in the strap. And Nacogdoches, Texas, on the map, is 32 minutes from San Augustine, where I live. We got there in 12. I don't know what made me sicker, the broken arm or the drive to get to the hospital. I think both of those equally contributed to my being very sick. But anyway, Lord intervened. Things were okay. Why am I telling you this very long story? Because a couple things are important about this story. Number one is, like I was talking to Joey about, names are important. Um, the big question that wasn't answered when my dad got the phone call was, which son and what condition is he in? Those kind of questions were left out of the equation and really caused a massive panic. But that's not even the bigger question. The bigger question becomes a little bit later on when the insurance company and the woman, God bless her, who hit me with the car, or who I hit, I probably hit her car more than her hitting me. I get home from school one day, and my dad said, look, we're going to meet with an attorney because they want to hear from you what happened. And I want you to just tell them the truth. Just whatever you did, whatever she did, you just tell them what happened. And whatever happens, we'll just take care of it. But we need to hear from you. Is what happened. That means you're going to have to, Charles, you're going to have to go to a courtroom, sit in one of those chairs like you see on TV, and have a lawyer ask you a question. But my dad said, before they do that, they're going to ask you a very important question, Charles, that I want you to answer honestly as well. And I said, what is that? They're going to ask you, do you promise that you're going to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? That's what they're going to say. Because you know what that means? I said, I think so. He goes, well, let me explain to you what that means. That I said, well, why are they doing that? Why do they even care about what happened? Well, they're going to decide how much they're going to pay and how much we're going to pay and all that. I said, man, that doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound good. Now I'm feeling bad. I'm going to cost us money now. What am I done? He goes, I'm not worried about that. Here's what I'm concerned about. They're going to ask you to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help you God. Do you understand what that means? I said, I think so. He said, let me explain it. You're going to leave out anything that's not true. And you're going to tell only the truth, no matter what it costs. No matter what it costs us, or you, or how embarrassing it is, or how strange it is, you're going to be asked to do that. And you're not just telling them the truth, Charles. You're telling God the truth. Does that make sense? I said, yeah. That makes it a little tougher, actually, but it's true. He said, so once you answer that question honestly, and I want you to answer that question honestly, you'll be able to answer the rest of the questions the lawyers ask you without any problem. I said, okay. He said, I know you're worried about answering the questions from the lawyers, but if you answer that first question right, you'll be able to answer anything they ask you. Do you understand? And I said, yes. There's this great preacher story about this dad who's, I think it's a preacher story because it's one that's often told, and I've taught preaching for about 15 years off and on to students. And I tell them all the time, make sure before you use an illustration that it's not one that's been used 1,000 times. Because, most church folk will know it. And then secondly, and I hate that this is second, but it is, make sure it's true. Okay, that's the second. That's not the first, it's just the second. But if you're not sure it's true, just say that, and then you'll be fine. But anyway, this is a preacher story that has been told a lot. If you've heard it, just pretend you haven't. It's about this business guy who is very, very busy, and his little girl wants to play with him. But he's working from home, and he says, honey, I'm busy. I can't do it right now. She's like, oh, Dad, come on. How long? And he says, 30 minutes. So the little girl, like kids do, she keeps up with the time. And 30 minutes to the dot, she comes back to Dad's computer and says, it's time, Dad. Time to play. It's been 30 minutes. And he panics because he's halfway in the middle of, a bunch of business, and he can't pull away. So he says, okay. He panics. He looks. He sees one of her coloring books there. He rips out the page. It's a globe. Right? A globe. And so he tears it into, 50 or 60 pieces. Okay, honey, part one of our playtime. I want you to take this tape, and I want you to take the globe back together. And when you're done, we'll do part two, which is you and Daddy will actually just play on the floor. But this is part one. And she smiles. Okay, I'm playing with Dad. And he's thinking, that bought me the 30 minutes that I need to get through with this assignment. So he hands her the sheets. She runs into the kitchen. She gets on the table. She starts putting stuff together. He breathes a sigh of relief, and he gets back into his work thinking, okay, I've got 30 good minutes to finish this up. That's what it's going to take. 5 minutes later, she's back, and the globe is perfect. And he's thinking, did your mom help you with that? Yeah. What is going? Did mom help you? No, I did it by myself, like you said. It's part one. Now it's time for part two, Dad. Honey, are you some kind of? How did you do this? I mean, I don't know if Daddy could do it that quickly. How did you do it? She goes, well, it was hard for me at first. The first couple of minutes, she said, I thought I would never get this put together. And then one of the pieces I noticed had a bottom of someone's face on it. And she said, Dad, did you know the other side of that page was a man? And that was a lot easier to put together. And I learned this. Here's the deal. If I put the man in the right place, the world comes together. Well, you know why that's a good preacher story now, because that is Matthew chapter 16. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you? Jesus asked. Who do you say I am? Peter answered, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades or death will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered his disciples at the time not to tell anyone that he was the disciple. So here's the thing, a couple things before we go. When we put the man in the right place, the whole world comes together. When we answer the question, the biggest question is not, who am I? The biggest question is, who do you and I say that Jesus is? Jesus looks at us, I believe, just like he looked at those first disciples and says, who do you say I am? We can rely on hearsay, right? And there's a difference in knowing about Jesus and knowing Jesus. And I'm thankful for both, by the way. I'm thankful that a lot of people, like my dad, I mentioned in that illustration, like my mom, like grandparents that I've had, like preachers and Sunday school teachers and friends that I've had and mentors that I've had who've told me about Jesus, right? What my dad told me about God was true. What my grandparents told me about Jesus was true. But there's a difference between knowing just about Jesus and knowing Jesus. And that's what Jesus was sort of deciphering from Peter, wasn't it? Who do you say I am? Well, first of all, Jesus says, who do people say? Who are people saying that I am? What's the hearsay, right? What's going on around here about me? Peter knew all that. Oh, here's what they're saying, Jesus. You might be John the Baptist. You might be a Jeremiah. You might be a prophet. They're saying all kinds of things about you. Okay, glad that you know that, Peter. Glad you know. Now, what about you? That's what I care about. Who do you say I am? And somehow, miraculously, Peter, who didn't always have the right answer, had the right answer this time. You are the Christ. You're the Messiah. Man, I know it. I have walked with you. I have seen you up close. You are the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. You're it. You're the answer to all of life's most important questions. That's you. Jesus says, now you got it. You got it. In fact, you got it so well that I know that my Father himself told you this. Isn't that how it always happens, though? Do you know that you and I didn't just wake up and decide to become a Christian someday? One day? God was already having a conversation with us before we even knew it. Aren't you glad? That's called prevenient grace in our Wesleyan tradition. That's just a fancy way of saying God went after us, loved us, sought us out before we even were aware of it. I'm glad about prevenient grace, by the way. Amen? These people I pray for, and that you pray for, some of them, I'm sure they once said the same about me. But anyway, these people we pray for, some of them we look at and go, whew, that's going to be tough. Right? Man. Okay, Lord, I'm going to throw up a prayer for this dude, but whew, right? I don't know if you've ever prayed that way to the Lord. But anyway, but I don't have to worry about that. You know why? Every time I pray that way, it's as if God is going, I'm already working on it. I'm way ahead of you, Charles. I'm working on, I'm doing things in his life or her life that you could never do. You can't call and wake them up at 3 in the morning and talk to them about me. They'll call the cops on you, God says. But I can. I'll wake them up at 3. I'll wake them up at 5. I will get on them in love and say to them, I'm here, I'm still here. There are places where they go, Charles, that you can't really go and keep your reputation, you know? You know what I mean? There are places that you wouldn't be welcome. But God says, I'm there. I'm not afraid. I'm talking to them right there. That's what Jesus meant when he said, flesh and blood didn't give this to you. My Father was already working on you. He was already coming before. So, again, the first thing of the two things today, you don't have to rely on hearsay. You can put the man in the right place because Jesus is already at work. That's true for you and me, and that's true for whomever we're praying for. Finally, this. When we allow Jesus, when we answer that question correctly about who Jesus is, he makes it personal and he uses that testimony to help change the world. That's what he did with Peter, right? Peter never could have pulled off all the great things that Peter did unless he got that question right. So, at that moment, Peter learned more about himself, he learned more about God, and then eventually he learned more about the mission of God. You know why? Because he got that question right. I like tests when you only have to get one question right. Those are the best kind. It's like, okay, get this one right, answers the rest. I like that. And that's what Jesus says to Peter. What about you, Peter? Who do you say I am? And by God's grace, because of God's prevenient grace, Peter was able to say, you're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. Jesus says, right answer. And not only that, right? Not only is that the right answer for you, but because of that, you're going to open up doors in the kingdom of God that would normally be closed to you, right? The keys, he says, to the kingdom, that kind of stuff. This is the key. When you get this right, the whole world comes together. The rest of things come together. So I urge us today, let God become the primary source. Let Jesus and who he is rise above all of our other priorities, right? In fact, we're in I know it's political season and all that. We as Americans really like to filter everything through our particular political bent. We're just good at that. We just know how to do that really well because we've done it for a long time. Here's something we could try, though, as Christians. How about this? What if we filter everything not through our favorite political bent, but through who Jesus is and what he's about? Wouldn't that be great? I mean, that's really what he's saying to Peter. You are the Christ, Peter says. You're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. What is he saying there? You are Lord. Right? And whenever in ancient days, there was a saying that went like this: Caesar is Lord and highest ruler of all. That was what polite people said in Rome. But that's not what Christians said, right? They said, Jesus is Lord, highest ruler of all, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That's who Jesus is. They changed their filter, and it changed the world. My prayer for us as the church, this local church and as the church capital C, is that we filter everything not through our favorite political bent or favorite national bent or what, that we filter it through Jesus. Now, just a little warning, when we do that, it aggravates both parties a little bit. And that's okay. It will. I mean, and I've got dear friends who are very, very politically committed, probably more than me, and very tuned in politically. Some who are involved in political campaigns in different states. I've been fortunate to have friends like that. Some who are serving, elected officials that I know. Some are folks that, one of them is serving in Washington right now, grew up in the church that I've pastored, my first pastorate. And, he and I don't always agree on everything, but he's a friend and good guy. And I always, when we do have conversations, I say, hey, remember though, you're not Republican first or Democrat first or representative first or Texan first. Remember you're Christian first. Jesus comes first. He goes, well, Charles, I know I try to practice that and it just aggravates people. Well, that's good. I said, you're in good company. Really? Yeah. 11 of the 12 disciples kind of got their head chopped off for that. But don't worry, you'll be okay. But it's going to be okay because ultimately the whole world gets put in the right place when the man is in the right place. Amen? That's what Jesus is saying. And I think that's what he's saying to us as well. So again, join me in prayer about making sure that as we make political decisions, as we make family decisions, as we make personal decisions, as we make job decisions, that Jesus, that we see Jesus looking at us and go, okay, Charles, what about you? Who do you say I am? Because that question will determine how everything else shapes up. Amen? That question, as a church and as individuals and as families, that question will determine everything else. Folks, it's the big question. It's the big question. That's the one. Okay? There are a lot of other little questions we have to answer every day. I get that. But when we answer the big question right, all those other questions become a little more clear. Let's pray. Gracious God, thank you for caring about us enough to ask us the big question. And Lord, thank you for being the answer to the biggest question there is. I just pray that your Holy Spirit would look us in the eye today and ask us the question, what about you? Who do you say I am?